Welcome to the Ask the Geographer podcast series, brought to you by the Education Department at the Royal Geographical Society with IBG. I'm Rachel, your host, and in each episode, I'll be joined by geographers from across the globe to delve into current events, publications, and research, all tied to the fascinating world of geography. Today, we welcome back Dr Kate Leeming, who earlier this year embarked on a 5-month, 9,000-kilometre bicycle expedition following the Syr Darya River from its source in Kyrgyzstan to the Aral Sea, and from there along the Amu Darya to discover its true source into the Wakhan Corridor in Afghanistan. This amazing feat was conducted by a small team where the use of bike meant that Kate could make connections with people that are not easily done when in the car. Kate, welcome back to the podcast. We're so pleased you've made your journey safe and well.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. It's great to be home again, but it was a fantastic journey.
Your route through Central Asia was very unusual. We've never heard of anyone doing a journey like yours before. Why did you choose to follow the waterways of the Aral Sea basin?
Well, Central Asia is a place I've known about for a very long time. I've had lots of interest, especially having travelled across Russia, the former Soviet Union, and I was really interested in the Aral Sea and the management or mismanagement of its waterways. And basically, Central Asia is a desert. It's quite a barren place with the sort of water running off the mountains. So I thought, what better way to tell a story about water and the importance of water than to follow its two major rivers, basically the Syr Darya from its glacial source right up there in the Tian Shan Mountains all the way to the Aral Sea. And from there, explore right around the Aral Sea and learn, sort of set up a whole lot of connections there as well. And then back up the Amu Darya back to its source. So in that way, I was really connecting with the people and the land. It was kind of like I was going with the flow, if you like to say, down one river and actually against the flow, I guess, back up the other river. So that's why I chose that, because I think it would give the best story about the true Central Asia.
Focusing on an area we talked about in our last podcast, the Aral Sea, can you describe the scene when you arrived at the Coral Dam at the mouth of the Syr Darya and explored the world's newest desert, the Al Kurum?
Yeah. So at that stage, I'd been down basically a long way down the Syr Darya, and the idea was to went through sort of the Delta region, and because the Aral Sea there's less than 10% of its water left. It'd been going across the Aral Sea, basically the old seabed, for quite some time. So to get to, firstly, the mouth or near the mouth of the Syr Darya, and then the reason why this place is important is that the Aral Sea, basically, since the late 50s, during the times of the Soviet Union, they decided that they would get more value out of taking the water from the rivers to grow cotton and rice and deliberately draining the Aral Sea. So they thought that the cotton was worth more than the fish in the Aral Sea, right? So basically they blatantly decided to drain it. And over the time, that sea got less and less until in about 1987, it divided into two parts, the smaller Aral Sea North and the larger Aral Sea South. And then it kept getting smaller and smaller, and basically more and more the water became more and more salty and unusable as well. So in 2005, the World Bank and the Kazakhstan government decided that they were put in a levee banks and this dam called the Kokharal Dam to kind of save Aral Sea North, which is a much smaller body of water. So it did almost straight away, and the water levels rose by about 12 metres, I believe. And so all that water that was becoming too salty and that had killed the fishing industry, etc., it diluted the salt, and then basically they could introduce more fish back, and so there's a small fishing industry, and there are plans to raise it further, but that's still in the pipeline. So to arrive there, and the Syr Darya is massively reduced to it's a shadow of its former self, but at least it still flows in there. And so it was really special to arrive there because on one side of the bank, you could see, there was still, water and reeds, and it looked healthy. On the other side, a little bit of water was allowed to flow out, but it was just like this water going out into oblivion. It was this far too large, and it was just going to evaporate. So it was really interesting to get there, and then I spent some time with my team. I was on my bike then, and at that point, also you can't just go to the Aral Sea. I was working with the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, and through them I got permission to go there. You can't just go there; you've got to have permission, and they sort of helped enlighten me about a lot of other details of management and so on. Certainly around the Aral Sea north. So I spent a couple of days going out to Kelmis Island and looking around, and basically that was very, very interesting. And then basically followed right around the Aral Sea north, and then around the very remote west coast, and down around the south to the northerly cities called Aral, and the southerly city on the Aral Sea is called Moynak. They're almost 500 kilometres apart. That's how big the Aral Sea was, and they were the major fishing towns. So I visited the north first, and then went around to the south. And I learned so much about also what's being done to deal with the problems, because in the south, the sea's not coming back. The north, there's a chance, although they need to improve the flow of the Syr Darya still to go any further. So, yeah, it was really interesting to look around in the north, but they're doing it in the south too. I visited some saxaul plantations, which are kind of a tree, like in Australia we sometimes grow tamarisks, which are the same type of tree. Certainly on my farm, we used to grow those in areas that could get a little salty to control the water table, and they're using them here because they are salt resistant and it's just something that will grow, number one. And one of the biggest problems with the desertification of the Aral Sea is that what's left is salt, toxic salt, because when they produce all their cotton, it's got lots of very nasty chemicals and fertilizers that get washed down into the sea. So when that evaporates, it's all in the salt, and it also, because there's basically nothing there. The climate's changed. It's got its own microclimate, which is hotter, windier, and you get lots of mini tornadoes, sort of whipping up this toxic dust into the air, and so it's really affected the local people a lot of serious health issues. But also that goes up into the air and it goes into the atmosphere around the world. Basically, they've discovered evidence of the dust particles in the blood of penguins in Antarctica. So it's something that does affect us all. So we should all be very interested in this. So these saxaul trees, what they do is, as they grow, they're kind of a shrubby tree, and they hold the sand, they hold the dust. So one tree, when it's mature, can hold 4 tons of dust, and it can actually also reduce the wind blowing through it. So it kind of can stabilize that a little bit and stop it going up into the atmosphere. So the saxaul are very important, and there's hundreds of thousands of hectares that have been planted on the dry seabed.
The drying of the seas exposed the seabed, which is releasing toxic dust into the atmosphere. Can you describe the local and global impacts of this dust?
Yeah, well, you can imagine what happened initially, especially with the sea going so salty. I mean, everything's dead, basically. In the south, there's a small part along the west coast that's left, really, and that's just so salty. So to give you an idea, the Aral Sea used to be about 8 or 9 grams per litre of salt, which is not very salty. And now it's about, in that Aral Sea south, it's about 200 grams. It was horrible. Like, some people go there for, just tourism to see it. But I sort of felt very sad because the only thing that grows in there are these little brine shrimp. So that's it. And they're using those because they're a high source of protein, and they can harvest them and sell them for protein. In the north, it's a different story. With the sea itself, the fish, basically they lost pretty well all of the endemic species, but they've reintroduced fish that will be good for the fishing industry. So different types of fish, some European flounder and some pike or perch. I can't remember what they are, but they're pretty good fish, and so they've actually got something going there. But it's also the whole environment as far as biodiversity goes, especially in that around the Amu Darya in the delta there. It's called the Kyrgyzstan region. And I really was privileged to learn about some of different parts of conserving the biodiversity, such as the Bukhara deer. They're threatened. There's another fish that just lives in the Amu Darya, just near the mouth, which is very silty, and it's called the shovel-nosed sturgeon. And there are very, very few of these left. And in the city of Nukus, I was taken to the Nukus fish farm where they're farming other fish, but they were for the first time breeding these shovel-nosed sturgeon in captivity to then release them into the wild, and they're an incredible fish. So there's things like that. There's also the forests, like the area used to have these Chugol forests, which are beautiful natural forests, and there's just a couple of areas of biosphere reserves that are left to really try to conserve those before they're totally lost, as the environment heats up and things like that. So it was very, very interesting to see those examples, but it's not a great news story for biodiversity there.
In your blogs, you also write about how water from the rivers is being managed, or rather mismanaged. Can you explain some of these problems and any of the efforts that any organisations or governments and farmers are doing to adapt and limit the water usage?
Yeah, it's such a big story, and in so many places. I guess when there's hundreds of thousands of kilometres of canals, basically all through the whole of Central Asia. But I guess when they were made cheaply, with thinking that water was an endless resource. I guess, I don't know, but they're not made well, so they're not lined. So there's a lot of seepage. A lot of the water's lost, and then there's also evaporation because the canals aren't covered. Probably the worst examples that I saw were in Turkmenistan, where they've taken so much water from the river, and there's just seepage everywhere. The Karakum Canal is the biggest one. That runs basically 1,350 kilometres right across Turkmenistan, almost to the Caspian Sea. And it's used basically for irrigation, and it's the economy really relies on it. It takes about 25% of the water from the Amu Darya, but the estimated losses through seepage are the government says 30% of the water, outsiders say 60% of the water. So somewhere between 30 and 60% of the water is lost just through seepage. And then there's it's a huge canal, so it's a lot of evaporation. And if they could do something about all of these canals, that's going to reduce, so much wastage of water. As an Australian growing up, here where we also have to manage our water, we don't water the roads. We don't do all these things that they do. It's like they seem to. It's frustrating to watch, And then the choice, obviously, of growing cotton, for example, it uses unbelievable amount of water, and they're not very efficient in general in that. So, by choosing to grow other types of crops would be a really good way to go. And many of the farmers are aware of this, but because it's generations and generations, that's what they do. There's a certain way of growing the cotton, and that's what they do year after year after year. But I did meet one farmer who's an example of this. He's done so much in researching growing sesame, and it only uses 40% of the water that cotton does, or maybe less than that. And he's you can't just grow any old sesame. He had to research it all, and went to the Netherlands, and really progressive farming. And then he's sort of taken this business from growing just the sesame and the right strain of sesame in the right way, all the way through to producing the oil. And then there's another farmer I met who had developed his own drip irrigation system, which it saves 40% of the water. And that he grows cotton, but he's become quite a celebrity because a lot of farmers think that's an amazing thing. They do want to help, they do want to do things, but they don't know how to change. So there's a lot of education going into that as well. And his work was really impressive. So it's not like it's hopeless or it's a massive problem, and it's got to be come from everything. The different organisations, changes in government, maybe incentives from the government, financial incentives to change. Lots of different ways. I spoke to so many different, really knowledgeable people in this area who experience the problem. So yeah, there's quite a lot of things that are happening there.
How does the need for water and other resources differ amongst the 6 countries you explored?
Yeah, because that's a good question. Because these countries used to be all a part of, apart from Afghanistan, these countries used to be all a part of the Soviet Union, and in Soviet times, it was all administered centrally by the government, and so they could share their resources. So there's two main countries that are in the mountains, in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and then sort of Uzbekistan's in the middle. It's got a few mountains, and then it's desert, and then Turkmenistan, is desert, and Kazakhstan is also lowlands, steppe, in that sort of area. So basically, the mountainous countries had the water, and they basically had the hydro that was set up in Soviet times. And then, of course, a lot of food is grown in the lowlands and the steppe in between. And they would share the water. Obviously, in the winter when the water freezes, the mountain countries need the fossil fuel resources, oil and gas, that are from the lower countries to actually, keep warm and that kind of thing. So there was always a sharing. And obviously, when the Soviet Union broke up, the sharing didn't happen so well because obviously they needed to just fend for themselves. And there has been some serious conflicts in the Fergana Valley, over the resources and particularly water. An example of not a conflict, but an issue that happened. So there was a dam being produced that was finished in 2017 in Uzbekistan, and sort of it just sort of at the base of the mountains. So because they couldn't rely on water coming all the time from the mountain countries, they also had to have a big reservoir so that the people in the lowlands could grow 2 crops a year. It's called the Sardoba Dam, and then it was hurriedly built, maybe in between Soviet times and post-Soviet times. And in 2020, 3 years after it was finished, the dam wall was breached, and it was a massive flood. It inundated, made 110,000 people homeless. I actually diverted off my route because I knew about this, and I went and visited the people who lived 8 kilometres from where the dam wall was breached, and they had a warning, and then they had to get out. And the family that we stayed with just made it out. The husband was the last person out saving people before they were drowned. I think 6 people died, but which isn't so many, but it was a big thing, and it was a wake up call to sort of that mismanagement and the need to try to manage the resources within a country. And there's a lot happening again now. Another point, maybe Afghanistan now with the Taliban. They're still building this canal called the Kosh-Tepe Canal. It's going to take another 25% of the Amu Darya's water. They're trying to lift their people out of poverty. You can see why they want the water, and also it's like they haven't had a share of the water before. But obviously the downstream countries, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, aren't too happy about it. So there's all these conflicts, and it's all about collaboration and trying. And again, things are happening, but it's a lot of diplomacy that needs to happen, and they just have to keep that dialogue open, because with the melting of the glaciers and things, it's not going to get 80% of the water comes from glaciers, and they're melting. So there's more water melting at the moment, but that's not going to be always the case. So there are things to consider for the future.
Your journey took you to the Fergana Valley. It's described as an extremely fertile, densely populated enclave divided by Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Can you identify one of the main opportunities of this region?
Okay, so the Fergana Valley is, as I say, it's an enclave of about 300 kilometres by about 150 kilometres, something like that. And the reason it's so fertile is it's at the foot of the mountains. So the water from the Syr Darya, in this case, and some of its tributaries, the Kara Darya, are on the edge of that, and they basically are used for irrigation. So the soil is washed down from those rivers, and that's why it's so fertile. So it's just really fantastic for growing anything. Cotton, of course, is a big thing, but there's lots of different fruit trees, grapes, you name it, they can grow it. So that's part of it. And the other thing is, when the Soviet Union divided, they tried to divide these places on ethnic lines. So you had the Kyrgyz people, the Tajiks, and the Uzbeks. They didn't quite get the lines right. So again, that geopolitical conflict comes into play with the sharing, particularly in that area. The sharing of resources has been difficult. I mean, I visited a silk factory there because I thought that what a great place in the middle of the silk route to visit to see how silk is made. because that Kokand is one of the main khanates and one of the main centres of the Silk Route. It's there in the Fergana Valley, and so always the trade from the east used to meet the trade from the west there. So yeah, silk was one of those things that was actually made there. There's also lots of other artisans, ceramics, wood carving, a lot of different things in that valley. So yeah, it's kind of a very interesting crucible. I say crucible because it's got mountains all around basically, and it's quite hot. Yeah.
What about any of the challenges? And how are people overcoming some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think again, it's all about diplomacy and learning how to share or work out, come to an amicable agreement between how they divide up the resources. Also, in the Fergana Valley, there's oil and gas. That's another really big thing. And in fact, when was it? It was not long ago. There was a massive oil spill. The biggest oil spill ever on land happened there as well. And I actually went to tried to look for the site and went there. It's all been cleaned up. They're not using that site at the moment. They have used it since that oil spill, but they're not using it at the moment. So yeah, how do they resolve? When there's a lot of money involved in these countries, their economies might be needing a sort of injection of money. So other than that, it's trade, tourism. Tourism is a really great way because there's a lot to see, and maybe so not just relying on resources, but actually incomes from tourism is another great way to partly resolve the issue and maybe take the pressure off the need for resources only.
Why did you think it was important to divert away from the main rivers, particularly the Amu Darya, and follow some of the main tributaries?
Yeah, well, actually, the Amu Darya is such a huge volume river. Okay, it doesn't actually make the Aral Sea anymore. It's very worrying. But in particular, there's this Zerafshan River, which is sort of 1,500 kilometers up from the mouth. And it's kind of like the river itself. And it's not just the Zerafshan, there's actually also the Karakum Desert. There's this corridor that's one of UNESCO's newest World Heritage Sites, which goes from across from Merv in Turkmenistan across the desert, and then it follows the Zerafshan River for 1,000, so totally for 1,000 kilometers. Which I followed it because it's the hub of the Silk Route. This whole area, as I mentioned earlier, all the civilizations, all everything relied on the water. So there's some amazing cities along that river, but also lots of other ancient cities that have gone now. I think there's 34 different sites. And so it was really important to follow this because of my story. This is where not just trade, but also science, religion, different cultures all intermingled. And it's the heart of it. So between east and west is that's the nub of it right there along that route. So following rivers like that. In the Pamirs, I was also following other tributaries of the Amu Darya because I was looking for the source. There was different sources. These rivers are huge. So I was following the main tributaries to get as close to the sources as I could. So I spent a lot of. If you look at my map, looks a bit sort of wild. There's lots of extra bits on it that I probably didn't need to do, but actually was really important for learning about the area and following those resources.
The final leg of your expedition through northeastern Afghanistan took you on a journey to find the true source of the Oxus River. Can you tell us why this is still contested?
Okay, just for everyone to know, the Oxus River is the antiquities name for the Amu Darya. That's the same river. And see, right back in the time of the Great Game, which was when the British Empire and the Russian Empire were sort of jousting for control of Central Asia. So they were not fighting, but it was all sort of lots of words and wanting to define lines. And the Oxus River itself, they decided, was going to be the demarcation point between the two empires, or the source of it. And it is actually there. So the Wakhan Corridor itself was created, which is like a buffer zone, which has the Oxus River on one side, or it's not called the Oxus then, it's the Wakhan. It changed its name, Panj, Wakhan, Wakchir, and so on and so forth. So, but it's basically takes one side, and it's that little strip of land, which is about 350 kilometres long and not very wide, was the divider between the two empires. And with China in the east there, taking a small part of the border, 74 kilometres of the border. So that's why it's there. So the source was important for that reason, because I needed to work out where the demarcation point was. And the first source they found, Lieutenant Wood in 1838, discovered the Zorkel Lake, which of course he called Lake Victoria, didn't he, at that time? So it is a source. It's a source of the Pamir River, which is part of the whole system. And then RGS's own Lord Curzon in 1893 led an expedition out there to discover the true source, because they realised that the Lake Zorkel or Lake Victoria wasn't it. And he discovered an ice cave at the head of the Wakhan River. And he came back with a lot of fanfare, and everyone thought, he's discovered the true source. But then there's Lake Chakmaktin, which I visited, which is a source. Everyone thought it was settled, and then in 2007, an explorer friend of mine, Bill Colgrave, travelled out to do an expedition, firstly to go to the ice cave actually and check it and see how it was and measure it up, which he did. But then in the process of going out there, he discovered this little stream called the Chelab Stream, which is really special because it runs off the mountains and then it bifurcates. Unusually it bifurcates. So one side goes to the east and flows into Lake Chakmaktin, which then is a source, and it flows, if you can follow that all the way around. And then the other largest source, the western side, runs into what's called the Little Pamir River, that runs into the Wakhan River, and that basically enters the other biggest source. So this little stream he discovered, he went to the point where it bifurcates, and he wrote a book about it all. And so when I was organising this, I thought I'll get in touch with Bill. And then he said, well, actually, I didn't follow the river through past the bifurcation. You must go to it and have a look and work out where the true source is. So that's how I finished my expedition, was basically I went to that point, to the bifurcation point, and then we did a little trek. It's only a 2-day trek. The stream itself is made up from two sort of key tributaries, one from the west and one from the east. We decided which stream was the bigger one. We moved to the west, and we followed it all the way down to the end. And it's the most magical. It's a glacier lake, and it's about 150 meters square, roughly speaking. It's really interesting because the guy with me was actually an expert in this, in sort of the geomorphology of the region. And it's like a little bowl with all the sort of glacial moraine rocks underneath. That means that even when the glacier goes, that lake could still be there for 10,000 years. So it's kind of, to go there, to step over, to climb over the lip of that, it was like, this is a really powerful, special place. I was kind of like, we're all just silenced by it. There's little glaciers floating, little icebergs floating in the lake. It was kind of like this moment in time. It was a very unusual feeling, but very special. So that's how we got there. That was the end of the expedition.
And what about the challenges or the changes that could face us in the future of that source?
Yes. So I was thinking, okay, once that glacier is gone, the source is gone, and every year it moves. But the actual lake, Rupert was explaining to me that even when the ice goes, there'll still be snow melt and water can still flow into that little lake, but it'll probably be much reduced. Now, as the fellow I met up with some glaciologists in the Tian Shan as well that were learning it. This is the International Year for Glacier Preservation. So, of course, this is an important story. And then I've got their impressions of how things are changing near the start of my journey in the Syr Darya. It's the Naran River, which becomes the Syr Darya. And then at the finish, I had this wonderful guide, just about Afghanistan's most experienced guide, who's been coming to this region in the Wakhan Corridor. He's a Waki person himself, for 20, 30 years. And, he's seen how fast those glaciers have been melting back. I don't have the science in front of me about that, but it's changing and changing fast, and it's really changing the area. It's changing for his people, who's, they need to graze their flocks on the grasses, the high grasses or the palmiers, and some of the rivers are so much water coming down them right now because the rivers are melting much faster, the glaciers are melting much faster. it's actually flooding their valleys. So they're also losing, the food for their animals. So there's lots of things you can see happening that they're just going to have to adapt and change. There's no other way it can happen. There's nothing else they can do about it. There's something that we can all do globally, but hits very hard when you see it up close and how it affects people, especially it's not necessarily their fault, So there are, those glaciers are going. There's no two ways about it. There's lots of streams that I was crossing on the way there, and also in the Pamirs. They're black water. They're not just normal, beautiful, clear glacial water. They're black water, and that means it's the old glaciers that are melting, because they're filled with silt, this black silt, and that's why we know it's old glaciers. One of the reasons how they know it's old glaciers melting. So it was interesting, but yeah, not good news.
Kate, thank you for sharing incredible insights and experiences from such a remarkable expedition. Your journey along the Syr Darya, Amu Darya, and through Central Asia not only highlights the beauty and resilience of these regions, but also brings to light the pressing challenges they face. It's inspiring to hear how human connection, curiosity, and determination can help us better understand the world around us, and perhaps even shape a more sustainable future.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to the Ask the Geographer podcast series on soundcloud.com or your preferred streaming platform. Dive deeper into the world of geography and stay informed with our wide range of resources, many of which are available for free. School membership grants access to even more resources, including online lectures and supporting materials for both teachers and learners. Explore our resources and discover our additional offers for education at www.rgs.org/schools.